complex to answer that, I think. I think it's an experience that I'll have to sit with my emotions later and re-experience it to fully unwrap what it is that this experience does to you, because it's something that is very much physical and mental. So I feel physically relaxed and a bit drained. I think it's something that challenges you to experience it fully. It's not something to be engaged with lightly. And emotionally, I think that's what surprised me the most, particularly that last room with the experience of that solitude and being completely disconnected from any external input of day, night, time, other people, nobody messaging you, nobody requiring anything of you except just to experience the colours in the room, and to feel very much deep within the earth and then very far away from it was something that is something otherworldly, and that's an intellectual experience as much as it is physically moving. I think, to be very obvious about it, coming from historic city of Florence to a very new and very futuristic almost space is a shock. And then the muted dark colours felt enveloping and warm rather than cold or austere. So any kind of potential claustrophobia that I felt didn't lead to anxiety. It just made me more aware and hyper aware of the environment. I think that was the only space I was familiar with prior to the visit through the website. So to say that was the one space I felt prepared for. I felt unprepared for everything else. So when I came in, I felt like I was coming to somewhere where I was ready to engage with that environment. What surprised me then was subsequently, when you led me into each chamber and explained the generations, I wasn't prepared for that kind of spatial and time shift. So the impact for me was stronger later, but only because I was somewhat prepared for that space. I feel like if you weren't prepared for that space, the unveiling of that is almost like, I don't want to say the word hollow in a negative sense, but it is like you've stripped away the world of everything we're familiar with, and entered somewhere that's existing on its own plane almost. It's certainly captured an essence that is intriguing and that makes you want to come and see more. And it's, it's small enough detail that you don't expect what you then experience later on. It's enough to kind of give you an idea of what you're going to experience is unlike something you've experienced before, which is what makes you want to come. So it's just enough. It's one little snapshot, but it doesn't take or detract from the experience in any way. What I said earlier and what I still think is that to have captured something that looks like it's ready to fall or ready to change into another motion, it's always a motion, it's a mid-motion, which I thought was particularly on an intellectual level extremely difficult technically to realize, so that's an impressive element. But then on an emotional aspect, to see a movement that we're all familiar with, like the tight pose of the warrior as opposed to the more fluid motions of the dancers, and then with lovers, certainly the title for me was an interesting starting point for then what I saw as a lot of tension between the two figures. Which may say something about how you approach the piece yourself, perhaps if you're coming to the piece with a more peaceful view of your current situation, or you've come from something more stressful or tense, perhaps it changes also how you view the relationship between these two figures that, as you say, when you turn, they seem to be almost changing their stance with each other too, and it is a support for sure. They certainly seem to be supporting each other, but also lovers doesn't necessarily mean always happy. And I think for me, there was a moment of these two figures they need each other to go through what they're going through, and that's the support element that came out very strongly to me, I think. It became clearer to me after having stood in the light of that reflection that the initial impact may be more aggressive, especially with the name saber and what that implies. However, there's also an elegance in a saber, and there's a beauty in a saber, and that's what you experience when you see how the light interacts with the form. And that's somewhat startling, considering what immediately comes to mind when you think of a saber, and then what you actually experience, how you experience the saber by being in its light and in the shapes that it casts, and seeing the form in a more physical, or experiencing the form in a more physical way, through the multisensory aspect, and that's hypnotizing. I certainly felt standing in the light was particularly entrancing, and was something that you didn't want to move away from. You were transfixed by those shifting and ever-moving lights, and that's not what you would expect when you come to a room and you hear the word saber. So that experience of that, and to leave that room with a different sense of the word saber was interesting. I definitely felt an emotional release. Nothing dramatic, but certainly even my stance shifted. I was able to lean back into the couch a bit more by the end, and to feel like you were being plummeted very deep into a cave, and that connection with the world at a more animalistic form, almost a prehistoric aspect. And then when I saw there was one detail that shifted my whole perception, and then it felt more cosmos, it felt more like a planet, and I felt like I was observing the world from very, very far away. So to go from that sensation of being very deep to the sensation of being very far away, and was a mental shift also that possibly helped with my body also changing shape. If I also changed physically as that mental shift occurred. And then it was a whole other experience again, just the colours, the sheer vast quantity of colours I just kept saying the word incredible. And to imagine that there are that many colours, and when you see that, it is startling, it's very startling. Maybe disconnected from apart from feeling disconnected from the outside world, which I think is going back to what you said about when that curtain opens, you've left behind the world, you've left behind your daily life, you've left behind Florence, certainly, and there maybe what more emotionally happened was I left behind the stresses I had coming into the space before, and even in my back, you carry stress in your body, you hunch when you're carrying stress, and that felt like it was being let go temporarily too, and that was surprising. That's not something that happens easily to a person. It's not like there's a trigger that turns off stress, but to feel so deeply within the world and then so far away from it is something that does disconnect you from the other worries and thoughts that you might have. You're forced to engage with something else. I thought about her a lot actually when I was experiencing it, because it does feel like you have maybe it's because you hear the words observer, observed, you do kind of wonder how that has played into her creation of the space too, is this concept of you feel very connected to her and her works, but she's not here. So you kind of wonder, and then this level of observation too is an interesting experience, because it's rare that you get confronted with the question, what would you like to tell the artist? And to be so aware of the artist for the last however many minutes it was, I've also lost sense of time. 25 minutes, it feels a lot longer, but in a positive sense. It feels like so much happens in that short time. But what I would really like to say is that to have such an intellectual and physical effect on a person is a very rare and special gift that is something that I haven't experienced on this level ever, for sure.